Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin right at 8:30. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Good morning, everyone. We'll begin in just one moment. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to United Way's The Question Before Us. I'm Bobby White-Gear, President and CEO of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania. Today, I join you from my home office. I'm a middle-aged white woman with short brown hair, and I'm wearing a lime-colored blazer. This is our 7th session of The Question Before Us, an initiative we started in 2020 to elevate the discussion of key challenges that we face in our region. This forum has brought together top leaders from different disciplines to tackle challenging questions. In past sessions, we've discussed the needs of our older adult community and practical solutions to deal with food insecurity. All our previous forums are available for viewing on our YouTube channel. So please like and subscribe. And I think magically it's also going to drop into the chat box for you as well. If you watch the news or follow it online, you have seen some heartbreaking stories across our country and here in our own region about the growing homelessness epidemic. News images of tent cities and people living on the streets grab the public's attention, but in a way, it overshadows the full impact that affordable housing, or the lack thereof, is having on our neighbors in urban, suburban, and rural communities. Over the past few years, average rent has increased at the fastest pace in decades. And that has come when the cost of everything a family needs, gas, groceries, childcare, utilities, are also on the rise. We all have experienced it. When you put all of this together, it takes just one unexpected expense for a family, even a family with steady employment, to face housing insecurity. And while one unexpected expense may not seem like a crisis for everyone, it can be for those who are living paycheck to paycheck. For example, an unplanned medical bill or a car repair can mean having to choose between paying rent or buying food and medicine. Sometimes we get caught up in the semantics. So to set the stage this morning, let's define affordable housing. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, affordable housing is where the occupant is paying 30% or less of their gross income on total housing, including utilities, 30% or less. Think about this for a moment. A person working full-time, earning $18 an hour, maxes out on an apartment of rent of $865 a month. According to Zillow, the median rent of a one-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh is $1,045 a month. There's simply not enough quality housing for families at the lower spectrum of earners. Across our 5-county region here at United Way, for every 100 low-income families, older adults, and people with a disability, there are only 47 affordable rental units available for them. That math simply doesn't work. It's not even close. The lack of affordable housing has an even greater impact on people of color and people with disabilities. In the Pittsburgh region, more than half of Black renters are spending above 30% of their income on rent. 7 out of 10 people with disabilities pay rents that are more than 30% of what they earn. So this morning, we're going to dig a little deeper into the subject of housing affordability and its impact. To help better frame our discussion today and to moderate our panel, we're delighted to be joined by the Pittsburgh Foundation's Jane Downing. Jane is a Senior Program Officer for Economic and Community Development and has led the Foundation's grant-making in that space for more than 20 years. In that time, she's been a champion and an advocate for upward mobility programs for entry-level workers, affordable housing, as well as transportation and green infrastructure programs. Over her career, Jane has served on the boards of dozens of nonprofits, including the Allegheny County Homeless Advisory Board and Neighborhood Allies. She also serves on the Board of Trustees of Bates College, where she earned a degree in government, and the Board of Visitors for the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, where she also earned a master's degree in urban and regional planning. Jane is an adjunct faculty member at the Hines College at Carnegie Mellon And I understand she's also quite the ballroom dancer. I think I'll have more questions on that at another time. This morning, though, Jane's dance card is full on a topic that we can't continue to dance around. So Jane Dowling, welcome to the question before us.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you all for watching us today. I am a white woman. I have gray hair, glasses. I have a blue sparkly earrings and necklace, and I'm in my home office and have plants in the background. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to give some background that might help explain the complexities of why the supply of affordable housing has been eroded. Historically, the shortage of affordable housing in our region has been attributed to 4 major public policy shifts affecting rental housing. The federal policy changes in the 1970s and 80s eliminated funding for construction of additional public housing units for the lowest families and began to fund individual housing vouchers. As eligible renters approved by housing authorities have to find private landlords whose properties meet certain standards and who will accept the vouchers. Secondly, in 1986, Congress created the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program for private investors to support construction of mixed-income housing units. And these units prioritize more moderate income renters, not the extremely poor that the housing authorities were serving with traditional public housing. Third, a decision by the federal government to allow the demolition of obsolete public housing, meaning bad conditions, to be replaced by mixed income housing financed by tax credits. Early on, there was no requirement for replacing the original public housing units on a one-for-one basis. And because many of the public housing units were vacant, thousands of low-cost units were lost. Fourth, large-scale outmigration of white households seeking to buy new homes and fleeing changing demographics due to the Great Migration from the South reduced demand for older homes. In our region, the collapse of the steel industry caused further outmigration from the region and an increase in regional poverty. And these exits from the region are still felt today. The 2020 census indicated that there were 100,000 vacant units in the 7-county metropolitan statistical area, with 40,000 not identified as for sale or for rent. That's a lot of units, a lot of vacant units. Now, more recent market changes have further reduced the supply of affordable housing, this time for both homeowners and renters. Beginning in 2008, at the Great Recession, corporate investors with billion-dollar capabilities began a large-scale national effort to purchase foreclosed and later single-family properties and small apartment buildings, which they then flipped into rental units. They pay cash and can either outbid local buyers by offering more than the asking price, or incentivizing sellers who accept lower bids because they want immediate cash. This practice has reduced the supply of moderately priced for-sale properties, limiting options for first-time homebuyers. And by increasing rents in the units that they flip and renovate, it's made units unaffordable for lower income households. Research has indicated that corporate landlords are more likely to raise rents and evict tenants and do a worse job in maintaining the properties than smaller landlords. Secondly, at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, the Federal Reserve reduced the cost of borrowing for households and businesses, which increased the demand for residential purchases. from other corporate investors and people looking for good deals. As inflation increased and the Fed increased interest rates, single-family property owners with lower mortgage rates just stopped listing their properties for sale, causing further competition for fewer units. And our providers tell us that there is almost no inventory for first-time home buyers at the moment. As Bobby mentioned, we have known for some time that there is not enough affordable housing for those earning less than 30% of the metropolitan area median income, which tends to disproportionately include Black and brown renters. In 2017, the gap for this group in the city of Pittsburgh was estimated at 14,000 units. A more recent estimate indicates a gap of 8,000 units, due partly to increased construction of new subsidized housing and the outmigration of low-income renters who cannot pay rent increases. Again, as Bobby said, housing costs have far outpaced income increases. So with that background, how has the shortage of affordable housing affected the households the three panelists are serving? What are the real human costs? And what is being done at the local level to bridge the gap? And what more is needed? These are the questions we're putting to our guests today. So let me introduce them. Kevin J. Barco is the Director of Operations of the Housing Choice Voucher Program for the Westmoreland County Housing Authority. He oversees over 2,000 tenant-based and project-based assisted units and over $14 million in annual program funding. Prior to Westmoreland County, Kevin served as the Associate Director of Housing Management Operations for the Allegheny County Housing Authority. In addition, Kevin has owned two successful public housing consulting firms providing innovative housing solutions, compliance monitoring, and quality assurance programs for more than 20 years. He earned his degree from the Smeal College of Business at Penn State. So Kevin, thanks for joining us. Our second panelist is Tammy Thompson, founder and executive director of Catapult Greater Pittsburgh, which is focused on anti-poverty initiatives and economic justice. Tammy is a documentarian, writer, business owner, noted speaker, and internationally recognized poverty expert. Through her T3 Media, a social justice media company, Tammy produced a widely distributed film highlighting the stigma associated with women in poverty. Catapult has developed a continuum of housing-related services and multiple wealth-building initiatives, including homeownership and entrepreneurship. Tammy brings her life experience of homelessness and countless personal setbacks to this discussion. And we're very pleased that you're with us today, Tammy. And rounding out our expert panel is Jason Tagano. Jason has more than 20 years experience in government, community and economic development, affordable housing, real estate development, and nonprofit organizations. Jason is the president of Level Equity Building and CEO of Responsive Community Partners. His work in municipal advocacy and policy includes assisting nonprofit organizations to accomplish their goals, connecting and partnering with federal and state departments, and identifying opportunities for support and collaboration. So welcome to Jason, and thank you for all the panelists. I want to invite the audience to join the discussion. If you have a question or observation about housing insecurity, please add it to the chat and we'll get to as many questions as possible. So let's get started. And I would like each of you to briefly describe the constituencies you serve and your efforts to address the challenges they face. So we'll start with Kevin, go to Tammy, and then to Jason.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks for the introduction. I'm a white male with graying hair, wearing a blue vest, and I'm working at the Westmoreland County Housing Authority office. What we do here and what's involved with public housing, we have two major programs. Is the Section 8 program, and that would be the Housing Choice Voucher program, and the Public Housing program. In those two programs, we provide assistance to families, and they pay approximately 30% of their adjusted monthly income for rent. The problems that we're seeing right now is a homeless problem. Fortunately, we have relationships with local homeless shelters. We run an emergency housing voucher program that gives a fast track to people that are in danger of losing housing or living in shelters. We also provide a homeless preference in our selection of families for participation from our waiting list. So we do see an increase in homelessness, and we have in this industry over the past several years. And some of these products or some of these ways that we do things do help to curb some of the homelessness that we're seeing in the area.
Thank you. Tammy?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Jane. I am a Black woman wearing a green shirt and a green headband, and I have shoulder-length Black hair. I am sitting in my office in East Liberty, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So just speaking about the demographic that we primarily work with and what goals we're helping people to accomplish, we primarily serve, but not exclusively, Black families living within the boundaries of Allegheny County who are seeking opportunities for economic security through homeownership or entrepreneurship or both. We also offer a custom-built trauma-informed financial education system, which is extremely important as we are helping people recognize, acknowledge, and heal from poverty trauma or long-term exposure to poverty.
Thank you. Jason?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, United Way, for hosting us today, and Jane and our fellow panelists with all of our expertise. My name is Jason Tagano. I'm the founder of Level Equity Building. I am a middle-aged white man. I have reddish brown hair and a fuchsia-colored t-shirt. Level Equity Building was started about 2 years ago to really help address part of this affordable housing crisis, really around equity, specifically through home ownership. What Level tries to do that really helps this system is we actually acquire the real estate in that development window. So those underutilized assets that Jane was referring to earlier in communities where there are abandoned houses or vacant lots, we would partner with community groups to either rehabilitate or build new construction on those sites. And then working with partners in communities like Tammy and others who provide that great education work, really trying to matchmake to sell the home to an existing community resident that currently rents. We primarily focus on Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color, immigrants, single mothers, and veterans as our populations of service. And we are a statewide organization that can work sort of across and throughout all of Pennsylvania.
Thank you all. Okay, so what are the social implications of a lack of affordable housing for individuals and communities that you serve, including impacts on health, education, and employment opportunities? And I'll ask Tammy and Kevin to answer.
All right. Well, this is a big question. I think, in short, the answer is the implications are massive. Housing insecurity of all of our basic needs, short of food, air, and water. Housing, I think we can argue, is the most important basic need. It is one of the basic needs that, if it is not met, if people do not have safe, secure, affordable housing in which they can thrive and have the mental, physical, and emotional bandwidth to concentrate and focus on other endeavors. It's just, it's so obvious that it's almost heartbreaking that more of us, from speaking from a societal place, more of us as a society are not doing more to address this super important issue. From education, children who are being moved time and time again, families that are becoming transient from getting caught up in a cycle of housing insecurity, the impacts on the child's education, not just the technical part of education, but the social impact of moving over and over again. I can tell you from experience, as a child who has lived in every corner of the city, it has a huge impact on who you are as a human being, your ability to connect with your peers and your instructors and feel some sense of rooted belongingness, from the stress of having to constantly think about whether or not that eviction notice is going to be on the door when you come home from work. Or whether or not your landlord is going to decide to sell their property and then you're going to move again. And we know families that have been caught up in this cycle over and over and over again. So when we're talking about our crime and the crime rate in our city here and across the country, if we really, really do a deep dive and really listen and pay attention to the trends, 100% housing insecurity is connected to increases in crime. So from a health, education, crime, economic perspective, housing is the core. It's so important that we find a way to address our housing insecurity challenges, both from a rental and ownership perspective.
Thank you. Kevin?
Thanks, Tammy. You really hit the nail on the head with all of this too. From the information that I know, it is food insecurity. It's the unhealthy homes. And the part of that also is people are living in homes that are actually substandard, unhealthy. They can cause conditions, the serious medical conditions. You have things like lead-based paint, mold, and other issues, in addition to the things we see on the surface with education, food insecurity, and general affordability of rents. But the key to this, as you said, is the stability of the household. It's the household stability is the foundation for which everything else builds upon. You can't have food insecurity, you can't have food security, you can't have health, you can't have the good education without having good affordable housing. And we see it quite often. The reason for the moves are affordability of the expenses and the rent. It's an obvious one. Eviction. That relates to the affordability of the expenses, but sometimes folks get to the point where they just can't pay the rent. They have no other alternative and they get evicted. Foreclosure. Folks that have lived in homes are having foreclosure issues, and social and discrimination issues. Somebody may be in a neighborhood that they don't feel comfortable with, that there's a problem that they're having. They have to move to a different location, and that location may not be affordable. So there's so many things that are intertwined, but I think the stability of the household is the necessary thing. And there's a study that was done by Washington, D.C. Center for Housing Policy that suggested that 3 or more moves of a child under age 6 may cause developmental and behavior problems. That's an alarming thing. As we know, children between birth and age 6, developmental time, that's the time that their bodies change, their mental capacities change, and it's a very critical time. And I'd like to take 1 minute to give an example, and it's such a timely example to this because I spoke with a woman approximately 2 or 3 months ago that was an example of exactly what's happening here. She grew up in a household that was a poor household. Her mother was a waitress, and her mother worked waitressing jobs. They were very poor. The mother would go out and waitress, and sometimes the kids would have to kind of take care of themselves. They moved 8 times because they couldn't pay the rent. In that 8-time period, they were evicted once, but most of the other moves were because they couldn't afford the rent, and they had to move to somewhere that was less expensive. Now, she said when she was a child, because she was uprooted in school, and as Tammy said, talked about education, her abilities and her education was a big problem because as she'd start a school, she'd get into the curriculum of that school, then they'd have to move, and then she'd have to try to get caught up in that school. And what happened over time was she dropped out of high school. She just couldn't do it, dropped out of high school. This whole all started because she knew that I worked for the Housing Authority. And she said, boy, when I was growing up, I wish there was something like this when I was growing up. Well, there was, but her mother probably was not aware of it. And now she's gone back to school. She's got her GED. She's had some health issues over the way, but is now working and has a decent job. But I thought it was important. And when I saw this as part of the curriculum and the questioning today, it just hit home with the woman that I had talked to several months ago. So seeing those kinds of examples as Tammy experienced and as this young woman experienced really tells us how impactful this can be to somebody that's in the situation.
Right. And these situations occur all over the region.
Right.
Many thousands of families. I want to follow up with just another question, Kevin, for you about whether what you're seeing in a more rural setting in Westmoreland County is different than what you saw in Allegheny County or in the city. I mean, how does the lack of affordable housing present itself in those communities?
Yeah, it's kind of a different scenario. There's fewer rental units, and it's few and far between. They're sparse setting. Most of the housing is in need of repair. Any rental housing that we're seeing is usually old and not improved. The demand is low in the rural areas, but so is the supply. So it's kind of an unmet need. There's a need for it somewhat, but then the supply isn't there as well. There's a lack of work, hospitals, social programs, transportation, all of those things are difficult for somebody trying to relocate in a rural setting. Now, you're not going to be able to lease to people that are used to living in urban settings in the rural areas. That's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to transform folks from living in the city of Pittsburgh to move somewhere out in Westmoreland County in a more rural setting. Now, however, there are certain programs that we're seeing that are more project-based housing with the USDA program for mortgages for USDA products that may help in certain situations where you can provide a social component. Right now, we're looking at a property. It's called Churchview Senior Residences. It's in the Norvelt United area. It's a USDA rural mortgage, about a $7 million mortgage, 24 units and 5 buildings. They're single level, but it's still in the planning stages. And we're looking more at that type of model because we can provide some supportive services in those. We can, but this is just for seniors now. We can supply supportive services in that model. And it's new construction, and it will be a nice, safe place to live for the seniors. But it is different in the rural areas than in what we're seeing in Allegheny County or in the city of Pittsburgh.
Okay, thanks. So to each of you, what do you think the cost to the region of not addressing the lack of affordable housing? And then how do these costs compare to the cost of just investing in affordable housing initiatives? We'll start with Jason, go to Tammy, and then to Kevin.
You, Jane. The real cost is a number that's somewhat hard to calculate from the reasons that Tammy mentioned earlier. There are so many different parts of our lives that are affected by housing, that the education cost, the health cost, these are things that add up in our families over time. But what I can say is that apologies, my dog is very excited. In 2019, within the state of Pennsylvania, and these are mostly federal dollars, but this is taxpayer money, we spent $2 billion on rental assistance programs to support approximately 217,000 families. And this is, I think, in some way part of the problem within this situation. It's been highlighted a lot in the conversation so far that the vast majority of money that is available at the federal and state level for affordable housing is rental housing. And the part of the problem with that is that it doesn't really allow for equity and ownership for individuals. And the rental housing that's created typically also has income restrictions around it, which doesn't allow for the upward mobility of individuals and families over time. And so as we really look at stepping into addressing the real problem of affordable housing, part of that solution needs to be funding and opportunities for home ownership for these families. Tammy and I have had a couple of conversations and it's been pointed out on this call today, it's not necessarily the lack of individual education providers or potentially the funding for down payment and closing cost assistance. It's the structures that don't exist. Where is the house for the single mom making $22 an hour? What's that mortgage payment? And as we talk about rental rates increasing, because we know that they will go up year over year, there's just no way around it. Mortgages are fixed. And over a 30-year period, we can have a 30-year fixed mortgage with a locked-in interest rate that really allows for families to build in that stability within their budgets over time. So understanding first that, as we say affordable, I think within our community broadly, it's a wide definition. But when you're actually talking to developers that build affordable housing and they chase low-income housing tax credits, that's a very specific market of construction that actually gets created in that community. So as we really look at how we start to solve these challenges, it can't just continually be more rental housing, because I would imagine if I ask Kevin, how many Section 8 vouchers are there in Allegheny County or Westmoreland County? And then I say, what's the waiting list look like behind those vouchers? Kevin's going to tell, there's always a waiting list and there's always a greater need coming behind it. And so we really have to start stemming this from a standpoint of creating these home ownership opportunities, which will lead to our children having home ownership opportunities, because we're creating these systems within the family and within the community that value ownership. And that's really part of what matters to me. When we talk about equity, it's not just on a participatory basis. Equity to me does actually mean ownership. You have to own, we have to create owners in our communities, because if the people that own the land don't live in the community and they're a corporate company that isn't worried about school taxes or what my neighbor's doing or all of the issues that we know we're facing in our communities, the lords of the land will do what they do, and they will evict our residents and they will move to other places that their communities aren't, their social networks aren't, their churches, their community centers aren't anymore. And what that does to our children has already been pointed out. So really understanding how we need to invest and why we have to actually invest in things like home ownership as part of the solution in really driving not just the access to affordable housing, but the growth of equity that comes through the ownership.
Right. That's a great segue for Tammy.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm getting ready to answer your question, Jane, but I do want to follow up on, I 100% agree with Jason. I do, we have this mentality where we feel like we have to focus on one issue more than the other, right? I talk about how people are like, oh no, but we need affordable rental. Affordable rental is the priority. And I'm like, yes. Affordable rental is the priority, but so is affordable home ownership. They're not two separate issues. They have to be considered simultaneously. I will always advocate for ownership. I think what ownership represents is power. It represents the power of choice. It represents the power of security. It represents the power of transference of wealth. And until we get really, really serious about creating more opportunities for ownership, we are always going to have these lopsided communities. And, I remember I've been in the real estate space for a long time, and one of the formulas that have always been in the front of my mind is this 80-20 formula, right? This 80-20, when you look at the health of a community, right? People always say 80% ownership over 20% rental is typically the definition of a healthy community. You will see more investment in infrastructure. You will see more investment in school districts. You will see less crime. You see families that have a rooted connection to the community, and therefore act as stakeholders in their community because they have an asset that they need to protect the value of that asset. When you have it flipped the other way, you get what we see, right? When you're watching the news, you get higher crime, you get less healthy food choices. People are not investing in bringing retail and grocery stores to the community. Like these home ownership is in essence the map for investment. People, when they look at their map about where they're going to invest, they're looking at how many homeowners are in this community. When politicians are considering which issues to focus on as a priority, they most likely are looking at a map that has a higher role of homeowners because in essence, homeowners are more likely to vote, right? So there's the home ownership is really the core of a safe, secure, healthy community. And so starting with the importance of investing in healthy communities, and you're investing in the health of a community, you are thus investing in the health of individual families. So thinking about when we think about home ownership, we're not thinking about home ownership from an individualistic perspective, right? It's great. We get to know these folks that we're working with, and we're invested in them. But what we're ultimately looking at is the overall health of the community. For every homeowner that we add to a community, we know the impact that that's having. We know that the impact that that's going to have on the children in that family. We know the impact that it has the potential. And I'm saying potential because if people aren't properly educated, doesn't mean that when they buy a house that it's going to become generational wealth. People have to be educated about how that generational wealth is created. But once they're educated about that, and that property is transferred into the next generation, now we're talking about opportunities that I didn't have, right? My parents never owned a home, right? So families who have an asset in the home, that asset is so important because it's not just somewhere to live. If it's done the right way, if it's in the right market, And you know, that home, it can in essence become a bank, right? You can draw down equity from that home to cover, you know, the cost of sending a child to college, or at least subsidize the cost of it, so that you're not sending your adult children out into the world in debt. You know, it's just so, I think it's so important that we are thinking more about home ownership, and why, you know, a prime example is an HUD choice neighborhood plan, right? I really struggle with some of the HUD choice neighborhood plan, because I am always so amazed that there is never a ownership component included in the choice neighborhood plan. And what does that say about HUD? What does that say about the HUD system, that we're not even thinking about helping people move from, you know, subsidized living to ownership, right? We say, okay, yes, there are, you know, FSS, or, you know, family self-sufficiency programs, and which are great when they're operated properly. But to not include home ownership opportunities in a choice neighborhood plan, to me, is intentional, and it's odd, and I think it's a mistake. So, you know, Jane, I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if I answered your question.
Talking a plan for investment, got to include home ownership for all those reasons. And Kevin, it seems to me there's a segue here about what you're seeing from HUD in terms of home ownership, interest in home ownership, and whether, I mean, I've been reading things that say they're really actually trying to beef up the Housing Authority home ownership programs. And but it's not clear to me whether it's for everybody or what, but.
We're really not seeing anything sweeping with the home ownership programs. They are encouraging home ownership. I'm glad Tammy brought that up about the choice neighborhoods component, because that is a big issue. It's actually a difficult grant to even get in the first place, but there's some things that are lacking in that. As far as HUD is really supporting home ownership, there's still a big component part of that. In fact, what we've done in the Westmoreland County Housing Authority is part of that FSS, family self-sufficiency component, at the end of the day, is a home ownership part. So there's the budgeting courses and all of that to go in preparation of home ownership. And we've successfully had a number of people move on to that. We strongly encourage that. We're just not rental housing. We're part of that home ownership piece. And I think, to answer the question about the cost of not addressing affordable housing in the region, overall, if you ignore that, families over time will reside elsewhere. They'll find other options. If your region doesn't provide the services, they'll either move out of your region, maybe become homeless, maybe be stuck in a rut that they'll be stuck in for the rest of their lives. The job markets will be affected. That's why we really, in the whole region, in the Western Pennsylvania region, we really have to really focus on these things and work with other partners to get that done.
Jane, I just want to follow up. There's a question in the chat that I saw that says, isn't it, the importance? So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that home ownership is more important than creating affordable rentals. It's not. And neither of them are more important than the other, right? They are equally important. I have the mindset, and this is just my opinion, that if we focused more on helping people who have the ability to purchase, the ability and the desire, because let's just be clear, homeownership is not for everyone. And it's not for everyone right now. Some people just aren't ready, and some people will never be ready because they make that choice, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is if there is an investment in creating more homeownership opportunities for the people that want it and providing a clear pathway to that homeownership, believe it or not, we can free up more rental properties. There are people who are in rental properties, who are in subsidized housing, who are in project-based programming that are paying the equivalent of market rate rent. Not because, so they're paying what could be paid towards a mortgage only because of fear or lack of access to understanding that homeownership is for them. So I strongly believe that if we are encouraging people to at least learn what it takes to become a homeowner, help people overcome the fear, and a lot of that is coming from poverty trauma. A lot of it is a psychology and a mindset issue that needs to be addressed. People will realize that if I'm paying $1,200, $1,300 in rent, I could potentially be a homeowner. And there's a lot of people. We talk to people all the time. I mean, a couple of years ago, I talked to a woman who was living in Northview Heights, which is a housing project in Pittsburgh. She was paying $1,100 a month to live in Northview Heights. Now, that wasn't an affordability issue. That was a fear. She was terrified. She was afraid because she had always lived in public housing and she did not ever see herself being a homeowner. Even the conversation was creating anxiety for her. So I'm saying all that to say that some of this is not about economics. Some of this is not, some of this is people have bought into the lie that's been told by the society that that homeownership is not for some of us. Right? And historically, if people are like, well, who's telling people that? Open a book. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of history around discrimination and practices of discrimination sanctioned by our own government to keep Black people out of homeownership. And we cannot forget that. We have to be very honest and transparent about our history in this country. And when we're sitting at these tables and having conversations about solutions and how we solve these things, we can't forget the history and how the history has seeped into the DNA of the people that we're serving right now. So just want to clarify that. I 100% agree that rental and focusing on creating more affordable rentals is important, but I also believe that creating a pathway for affordable home ownership is just as important.
Great. Okay, I want to switch because the question was also for Jason, but I just want to do a little clarification. Both Tammy and Kevin mentioned Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. It's a special initiative from HUD. It's a competitive process, involves planning and building new mixed income housing. And the carrot, the implementation carrot, is a $30 million grant, or now up to $50 million grant to replace obsolete public housing. So, and there's Larimer Choice is almost completed. There's an application for implementation at Bedford dwellings in the city of Pittsburgh. One in planning at McKees Rocks for the Allegheny County Housing Authority, and another in planning, or the planning's just finished for Fineview, for Allegheny dwellings in Fineview, which is also a city neighborhood. So just did that as background. So Jason, the question about the costs of not addressing the lack of affordable housing, and how do they compare to cost investing in affordable housing?
So, and I think Tammy really hit a good point. You know, there are programs already to create new rental units, whether it's through programs like HUD Choice Neighborhoods, like we've talked about, or the low-income housing tax credit. Ultimately, those programs are sort of reauthorized and rebooted every year. And so we spend in Pennsylvania almost $2 billion a year to subsidize rental housing units. This is taxpayer money, and it goes out every year. We're going to spend it this year. We're going to spend it again next year. And it's needed, as Tammy pointed out. This isn't to say that rental isn't valuable and home ownership isn't for everybody. There is one pot of money at the federal level for home ownership. It's through the Federal Home Loan Bank, and it is restricted to approximately, I think, 5 or 6 units per year per community. So at scale, there just isn't the same funding opportunities to deliver home ownership to a community in the way that there is to deliver rental. And again, not trying to, really put down rental in any way, but when we look at where equity is distributed through rental, ultimately it goes to the developer that owns the rental property. That person normally does not live in the community, and that money is not recycled back into the community in an equitable way. And so this is where I think, to Tammy's point earlier, it really does need to be more equitable solutions that are community-based, which allow for those existing community residents that are living there already. Because I would say the same thing that Tammy's saying. If you're paying $1,100 a month in rent, let's go get a mortgage. Like that could be a mortgage payment. Let's figure that out. Because if you could pay your rent every month, you could probably pay your mortgage every month. Your landlord hasn't kicked you out. Because if you weren't paying your rent, your landlord would kick you out. I promise. So how do we help banks see that? How do we help government see that? Because to Tammy's point, this is a multi-generational systemic issue that has been around hundreds of years, hundreds. But it's really up to, I think, us and the good folks on this call with real solutions. Tammy has real solutions, and she can really educate buyers to make sure that, in theory, if you bought a house from Level, you're not going to get foreclosed on in 2-3 years, because there is post-purchase education, and we're going to protect you to make sure you can stay in your home and build that equity over time. Because when you get a mortgage with Level, the payment that you make in month 1, year 1 is the same payment you will make in year 29, month 11. And the difference for that buyer or that participant over a period of 20 years, we ran some really rough numbers on what a 20-year pro forma would look like for a person if you start today spending $1,000 a month, whether that's in rent or whether that's in a mortgage. The equity swing between the two is approximately $400,000, because your rent will go up every year, your mortgage won't. And what does that mean over a 20-year period to someone who's just getting by? You'll end up paying approximately, by year 20, you're paying something like $1,800 a month in rent every month. And what that means over a 20-year period to a family versus what it would mean to be paying down a mortgage and building equity. And it becomes really powerful as we can start to scale this impact. If government and funders invested in home ownership in a way that they invest in rental, imagine what Tammy and I could do with something like that.
We'll come back to the issue of home ownership in terms of what can be done in a few minutes, but let's, can I ask Jason a question about the largest challenges in creating and maintaining affordable housing, and how can they be addressed?
Yeah, so there's 3 major challenges, and we've talked to one quite a bit, and it's equity. And so we can highlight that, but the other 2 are the ones that really need some meat behind them. This is impact, and it's also scale. And we've sort of talked about impact, because impact really, I think, needs to be measured not in an economic impact, but in a social impact. Because ultimately, if we're talking about, and we throw generic numbers around a little bit, but I want to sort of needle in on some round numbers. Jane, you sort of mentioned earlier, I think, that there's a need for 10,000 units of affordable housing in the area, or somewhere around that. I think you said 15 at one point and then 8 for another. So just for simple round math, if we could say 10,000 units, that's about $4 billion in hard construction. Where are we going to get that? because it doesn't exist. And so as we start to look at how we drive impact, we have to start looking more strategically at how we make the investment at all. And so again, coming back to, there's tons of money out there in theory for rental. There is no money out there for home ownership. And so as policymakers, as funders, as government, we have to start looking at how we start to make true impact. True impact comes from measuring these social returns on investment that are things that Tammy was alluding to earlier. When you have home ownership in a community versus rental, more home ownership versus rental, you'll have less 911 calls. You'll have more kids staying in schools and not moving out of the district. You'll have all sorts of different community engagement pieces that lend to a higher return on investment to that particular community, both from a government tax side, but also from a business side, because businesses count on rooftops to sell their products. So as we start to look at what this measure of social impact can be, we really have to start to understand how those investments need to tie to that real deliverable impact to that family on the ground. And as we start to answer that, then the next question truly becomes scale. We have to be able to scale this, because there are existing communities and existing groups out there that do home ownership rehab of vacant structures already. The problem is they can't do it to scale because the money doesn't exist. So, in Elmwood right now, OBB works really hard, and they do a rehab for resale program, and they do 5, 6, 7, 8 a year. Oxford Development has a project right now. They're about to drop 120 units. And what do those 120 units do to the market compared to what OBB is trying to do with home ownership? And so we really have to be able to work in communities at a level of real demonstrable scale, and connecting with folks like Tammy to identify residents that live in these communities already, put them on education pathways that would allow them to meet level at a time and place where homes are turning over, so I can sell homes to Tammy's clients at rates that they can afford, to go back to, what's your mortgage? Because I'll write it to a 30% or 33%, because one of the things that we'll work on with America and using it again, private property rights. If Level owns the property, Level can sell it to the buyer for whatever price it wants to. And so if the buyer can afford 100,000, then the sale price will be 100. If the buyer can afford 80, then the sale price can be 80. If the buyer can afford 120, then the sale price can be 120. But that's hard to do, and that takes tons and tons of subsidy. And those subsidies exist on the rental side, and developers get them for their LIHTCs and their housing choice voucher, or not choice voucher, choice neighborhoods. They don't get them for home ownership. Not at scale, not at impact. But what if we could do 100 units in a community? And right now, Level is in a community. When we talk about, I'm glad you said 80-20, Tammy, because that's exactly what so right now, Level's got a 10-unit project in McKees Rocks Borough. We've been working with the community groups in McKees Rocks for the last 3 years. And we're about to break ground on this 10-unit project now. We just got full site acquisition. We're moving through construction. The project is fully funded. And we're really excited because we've got a list of 50 existing community residents that want to be homeowners. And we are committing to do 100 units in McKees Rocks. And what will that mean to create 100 units? Because right now, about 80% of the community is rental. And about a third, according to what Stowe Rock School District has told me, a third of the children that start the year in the district do not finish the year in the district because they move out of the district. And we've already talked about what that means to kids, but these are real stats in a real community. And what would it mean if we could increase the home ownership rate in that community with existing residents that already live there, and giving folks pathways to home ownership? And so I'll end on this because it's Level's mission. We want to do thousands of homes in our communities, and we want to make partnerships with folks to do hundreds of homes in neighborhoods. And we really want to create homeowners, sustainable homeowners for people that live in their neighborhood, that have been living in their neighborhood. And Jane, I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox a little bit. I'll shut up.
Okay, and I think we need to move to the next question. Thank you. We have interesting, great discussion about the need for additional policy. But I want to first ask Tammy, whether you've seen some examples of some successful affordable housing initiatives, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of successful initiatives in this city. I think they go somewhat unnoticed because the problem is so huge. But I think there's starting with the Housing Opportunity Fund. I think the Housing Opportunity Fund, which created. I really want to commend the activists and advocates who really just were relentless in helping to shape the Housing Opportunity Fund and make it something that we're using to this day. But there are programs within Housing Opportunity Fund that are beneficial to both renters and homeowners, helping existing homeowners, helping people who want to become homeowners through down payment and closing cost assistance, rental assistance. The HOF fund has supported, and I am newly appointed to the HOF commission. So I'm still learning a lot of the products, but from what I know and what my colleagues and some of us have used in helping folks both with rental issues and home ownership issues, HOF is a good resource. I think all of these programs are good, and I am always advocating that we can do better. I think we can do better in a lot of the resources that currently exist. Rising Tide Partners is an organization that I believe is doing amazing work in recycling. I saw a couple of questions related to how do we recycle existing property? How do we get our hands on existing properties, renovate, rehab, and get them back on the market as both rentals and ownership opportunities? Well, Rising Tide Partners is doing just that, investing and being creative and innovative of finding innovative and creative ways to finance the purchase and rehab of existing properties. Now, there are entities in this city that could be doing better. And I think what we have to do while we're having these conversations and we're trying to put our heads together to figure out solutions for housing, the very first thing we have to do is hold accountable those entities, institutions, and organizations that are being funded to do this work and are not doing it effectively and efficiently. So that, to me, first and foremost, is holding organizations accountable. We have these assets in our community. We have these programs here. We have the bones of some of them, at least. So there's a lot that is here that just isn't being implemented properly, right? So some of this is administrative stuff. When we're thinking about policies and systems and things, and we're always trying to fight the good fight towards policies and systems, sometimes we have to bring it down a little and look at what is already here that is not effective, that needs to be improved, that needs to be held accountable. I think there are entities that are doing good work here. There are lots of CDCs and lots of smaller nonprofits and folks who are on the ground doing great work, developers who are being intentional about creating rental units and doing the best that they can. But there are larger entities, government-funded entities, tax dollar-funded entities that are not doing enough and need to be held accountable.
Okay, and I want to go back to the Housing Opportunity Fund in terms of just a plug. That was created primarily through activists, but they are accessing 1% of the realty transfer tax from the city. The realty transfer tax is a tax on every time a house is sold. There's tax, and a portion goes to the state, a portion goes to the county, and a portion to the municipality. So Pittsburgh has a 3% realty transfer tax, but 1% of it was dedicated to create the Housing Opportunity Fund. It's $10 million a year. And at the state level, a portion of their 1% tax is going to fund a program in FAIR, and I won't PHARE, FAIR. And there is a drive right now to increase that cap to $100 million because there's that amount of money going to the state from this tiny little tax on all housing sales process. So it's an opportunity for other municipalities or counties to think about using their 1% or whatever their percent is to create funds to help affordable housing. So it just
thank you for that, Jane. Thank you for that context, because you're absolutely right. And there's a lot of people that were not behind that initiative. And I think it's unfortunate because what that fund has done has been incredible. It's a source of funding that would not have existed without that. So I think it's important. I also want to mention PHFA. I think PHFA, our state housing finance agency, is doing phenomenal work as well and being intentional about creating opportunities. They just recently, as a matter of fact, earlier this year, have launched a pilot mortgage product that has been designed specifically for the purposes of helping to increase Black home ownership in this city and county. And being intentional about creating a loan product. That, somebody had a question about what can lenders do? Well, that's what lenders can do. Lenders can be intentional about creating products that help families overcome traditional and historical obstacles and barriers to ownership as well. So I think there's a lot that is being done, but I think there is a lot more that could be done. Starting with analyzing, auditing, holding accountable the folks who have the power and have the tools and the resources to do what needs to be done.
Right. Thanks. And for more on that, you can check Tammy's Facebook page and social media. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about government policies that are helping to increase access to affordable housing and or which are hindering progress?
Yeah, the greatest thing that's come out lately that relates to what we do, on April 13th of this year, HUD announced a $30.3 billion commitment for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Excuse me. This is a historic number because compared to last year, it's $2.9 billion higher than what was provided last year. So the funding's increasing. $27 billion of that number is going for renewals to keep people in affordable housing. 337 million will be continued assistance for properties that are being demolished. We talked a little bit about that earlier. I think, Jane, you spoke of that in your intro, how outdated old public housing is being demolished and being replaced with other subsidies. One of those subsidies could be Section 8 tenant-based or Section 8 project-based assistance. So there's $337 million earmarked for that. $50 million for homeless veterans under the VASH program. That's a big initiative. The Veterans Assistance Program is a big initiative from HUD. It's good to see that we have these programs for veterans. Also, in addition to that, there's the Family Unification Program, bringing families back together, $30 million to that program. And then the most unusual thing that we've seen that's not typical from HUD is $50 million for the Flexible Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's the regular Housing Choice Voucher Program, adding units to the current unit counts at housing authorities. Used to be specialty programs were funded only, and HUD never came out with any freestanding vouchers just for general population. Now they have. So all of this is a really great thing that's come out this year. Again, we have not seen that in the past. We hope it continues. HUD's been very plentiful with funding. We're even looking at, we've had back when, if some of you recall sequestration, back in those days, for public housing operating fund, we were getting only a small percentage, maybe even 89, 90% of what it took to run a public housing agency. HUD establishes what it takes to run a public housing agency. They only give us, 89% of that figure that they determined to run a public housing agency. That was back during that sequestration time. Now, HUD has been funding us at almost 100%. So we're very happy about that. It's a good thing. We hope that it continues. Some of the other things that we're seeing that are good out now, of course, we talked about the tax credit program. Tax credit, low-income housing tax credit program is good. There's a 4% tax credit or a 9%. And 9% is a 70% subsidy. That usually works fairly well. Hard to get, but works very well. Private investors, so those of you that don't know how it works, private investors purchase these tax credits to use for themselves to reduce their tax liability. That then becomes an investment into the development that's being done. At least 20% of the units have to be occupied by tenants with incomes that are 50% or less of the area median income. There's a lower debt service and a fast lease up. So PHFA and the IRS are really focusing on tax credits. Those are really, in our industry, one of the only ways for us to build new affordable housing right now. There's some other options. We talked about the choice neighborhoods and the good parts and bad parts of choice neighborhoods. But that's really where the focus has been in this industry with housing agencies. Something else that is very interesting that the city of Pittsburgh does, inclusionary zoning, very good thing. It's created and dedicated affordable housing by encouraging developers to include specific share of below market rate units as part of their market rate. We're seeing a little bit of movement nationally with it. Pittsburgh has been on the forefront to create those inclusionary zones. What it does, it creates a good mix of low income housing with market rate income housing and gives benefits to the developers that develop and incentives that develop that. I think that's a good focus where we're going with this in the rental market. Some of the fair housing laws, there's some HUD proposed fair housing rule published on February 9th. It's streamlining equity plans for fair housing analysis, giving underserved communities a greater say in the action program participants will take to address fair housing. It provides tracking and follow-up. It's probably one of the biggest things that's occurred lately in the fair housing industry. It actually extends the further extends the affirmative fair housing rule from 2015 and adds to it. One of the other areas that we see improvement is with the Fair Housing Improvements Act of 2023. It expands protections for persons for denying housing for income-related reasons. You cannot deny a person because they're receiving public assistance. You can't deny them because they're getting VA benefits. You can't deny them, because they're receiving any other types of benefits. It's a good program, and also the city of Pittsburgh has also adopted something very similar to that. So we're looking forward to those kinds of things to help protect our residents that we serve. Also mentioned, Universal Voucher Program. It's a unique concept. Matthew Desmond, the professor in sociology from Princeton, wrote the book Evicted. And what he did was he followed 8 families, 18 months in Milwaukee, and kind of addressed or followed exactly what they were experiencing in moving with unstable households, in the struggles that the families had, and wrote a little bit about it. And it's, you know, the whole idea of the universal voucher program, which he promoted, is that you kind of wrap the housing voucher with additional money available for purchasing food, medicine, transportation, and other necessities. So it reduces the reliance on more of the food stamps, the SNAP, and those types of things, where you're receiving assistance from different component parts of government, and you're getting it in one package. It's kind of an interesting model. We'll see what happens with it. I know that HUD has looked at it as well and has talked about it. Nothing's moved on it yet, but it's an interesting concept that may or may not happen, you know, for us here.
Cool. Kevin, I think we need to wrap up. This is all very interesting. And I actually think the universal voucher system is like the universal basic income thing. It's a concept who will grow in interest over time. So we need to wrap up. I haven't been a very good timekeeper here, and Bobby's going to help us answer some of the questions from the chat. And the answers need to be short. and Bobby's going to take the lead.
Yeah, I've just popped back in to help go through some of the questions in chat, and it's been pretty active. So we'll take a couple of them. One of our participants asked if we can learn some things from other cities, some of the small energy efficient houses that are being built in Seattle as an example. Are there other housing strategies in other cities that we could consider regionally?
So
Feel free to hop in.
I'll jump in really quick, and I'll keep it brief because I'll just be in general here. There absolutely are some models across the country that could be used here. But I think what's important when we think about models and things that are happening in other parts of the country, we have to remember that Pittsburgh is very unique. The things that might work in a city like, you know, Jersey or Ohio even, or anywhere else, might not work here, right? I think when we're thinking about a model that would work here, we also have to look at how were government agencies involved in those models in other parts of the country? What's the synergy of corporation, government, nonprofit? Like, how are all the sectors working together? Because typically that's what makes the models work. And if we're not able to do that, if we're not able to find synergy in all of our, you know, nonprofit, for-profit, government agencies, nonprofits, that's where we're really going to find the right model, is when we find the right synergy between all of these entities.
Thanks, Tammy. There's another question in the chat about someone who asked about resources for homeowners for needed repairs that have risked their ability to remain in their homes. Can somebody jump in? Looks like Jason.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Recently, there was some legislation passed at the state level. It's called the Whole Home Repair Act. In Allegheny County, it is being administered by Action Housing as the primary entity. And for those of you on the call that are outside of Allegheny County, technically there's a county designated organization that was established by the state for each county. So each county will have a primary agency to apply to. Any senior individual with a disability, veteran, homeowner can apply to this fund, and I believe it's up to $50,000 in assistance in construction-related activities. So roofs, ADA accessibility, bathroom modifications, things like that would be covered under this program. It's new, it's ripe. I would encourage everybody to apply. It really seems like it's a good program.
Locally in Pittsburgh, the URA just released a program as well. So you can always go to the URA website. There is a repair program. I just saw that it was released yesterday, I believe.
The real effort with whole home repair program is sustainable funding, because it's funded with ARP money. So there's a push to try and make it a permanent state program. There are something like 2,500 applications already for Allegheny County's program, and it's only enough money to serve 200 to 250 families. So it needs, I mean, it's a great need. I think the applications have identified that, but push needs to be on the legislature to make it permanent.
And David Weber has a question about income eligibility. I think, David, I'm not 100% sure, but most of these programs have an income eligibility at 80% AMI or below, which is an antiquated number and needs to change as well. But I think that's what the qualification is.
There were a couple of questions about lenders and programs to encourage lenders to increase home ownership, specifically calling out a faithful renter program that Bank of America has implemented. What else can we do to help advocate for programs that open up some lending opportunities for home ownership?
I think personally that people have the wrong idea about what the obstacles and barriers to home ownership are. That people immediately go to credit. And if you really look at the note, credit is not really the bigger issue. It's typically debt. The debt to income ratio is typically the problem. So basically what that means is that people have more debt than income. And it doesn't work. The formula doesn't work for them to be pre-approved. So I saw a couple of comments about financial education and financial literacy, and I am a huge proponent of financial education tools. I've been writing financial education programs for a very, very long time. But I always want to remind people that we cannot financial literacy, credit, save, budget people out of poverty. Right. So you can be the best budgeter, you can be the best saver, you can have an excellent credit score. If you don't have the income, it's not going to matter. So income is really our bigger challenge in this city. At 30, Black families in Pittsburgh on average are earning a little over $34,000 a year. Median, that's the average median income. And that is really the core of what our problems are here. We have an income disparity issue. We have an income issue that is at the core of all of this. So yes, credit is important, but credit is not typically the bigger barrier. Neither is helping people budget or learn how to save. We can always teach people that, but teaching people and helping people move and increase income is the bigger challenge. So debt versus income is our biggest barrier to reaching home ownership.
Thank you, Tammy, for that important clarification. And we've reached the point in our program, I think we could have asked a lot more questions and had even more robust conversation. And unfortunately, our time is running low. So I want to thank Jane for her expertise in moderation, our panelists, Tammy Thompson, Jason Tagano, and Kevin Bartko. It's been a really robust and important conversation that we've had this morning. Affordable housing is an issue that goes beyond shelter. Stable, affordable housing impacts our public health and our well-being. And as we've discussed, statistics show that adequate affordable housing reduces the cost of healthcare, it improves academic outcomes for children, it reduces psychological stress, and improves financial freedom and self-sufficiency for families. Housing affordability weaves a common thread through all of United Way's strategic investment priorities, meeting basic needs, moving to greater financial stability, and building for success in school and in life. And that's why United Way invests in organizations that work to provide access to safe and secure housing, programs that prevent eviction, encourage and fund home repairs, and help keep utilities on when families are facing financial crisis. What can you do, those of you who have joined us this morning? You've taken an important step by participating in this conversation. You can become a more engaged citizen and voter by visiting the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania to learn about and advocate for fair housing policies. We'll put that link in the chat for you. I also have other excellent resources for you to learn about this complicated issue. Some have already been referenced in the discussion. Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City by Matthew Desmond. I would also recommend his latest book, Poverty by America. I was going to hold, there you go, Tammy. I was going to hold both of them up. Somebody borrowed my copy of Evicted, so I didn't have it here at my desk. I'd also like to encourage you to volunteer with an organization such as Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh. We'll add those links in the chat as well. On behalf of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania, I want to once again thank Jane Downing of the Pittsburgh Foundation for moderating today's session. We'll be posting the entire session on our YouTube page, and I encourage you to share it with friends and coworkers who you think might benefit from being a part of the discussion. And I also want to thank the Eden Hall Foundation for their continued support that allows us to host these forums. It's part of United Way's commitment to engaging our community in addressing questions that we work to address every day. If you aren't already engaging with United Way on social media, please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and stay connected to our vital work. Thank you for making the time to join us this morning for this really important conversation. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.
Thanks.